Welcome to Freethinking 101. My name is Mark Mabry of the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. Today we'll be talking about two articles that were published recently in the American Rationalist magazine, presenting two sides of the many-sided issue of abortion. And joining me is Steve Best of the Rationalist Society. And Steve, would you share some of the views that were expressed in the articles with us?
Yes, I will. This is the magazine, the American Rationalist, and the heading indicates that both sides of the abortion issue from a philosophical viewpoint. Basically, it's not a religious viewpoint that's presented here. One of the presenters is Judith Boss, PhD in philosophy at the University of Rhode Island, and she wrote on abortion, personhood, and human rights, a response to the new elitists. She is against the right to choose abortion. Gilbert Fulmer, also PhD at Southwest Texas State University, wrote on abortion, a philosophical defense. He supported the right to choose abortion. We'll start, I think, with Judith Boss's article. She observes that there is currently a controversy over the nature of personhood, which has developed in recent decades within the context of the abortion debate. Human dignity or moral worth is something all humans, both before and after birth, have, and have equally, simply by virtue of their species membership. Therefore, abortion on demand is morally unacceptable. That's her view in a nutshell, but she goes into quite a bit of detail. At the other extreme are those philosophers who claim that membership in the biological species Homo sapiens is not morally significant by itself, but only in virtue of its relation to other properties that are morally significant in themselves: consciousness, rationality, self-motivated activity, ability to communicate, self-awareness, and the ability to use and understand moral arguments are some of these properties that merit the respect and protection that accompany personhood, including the right to continued existence. The philosopher Immanuel Kant is often cited by this latter group of philosophers to justify the exclusion of humans prior to birth from the category of personhood as persons who are rational, autonomous beings capable of imposing moral laws upon themselves, presumably because they can't do that. However, Dr. Boss believes this interpretation is in error, as Kant simply assumed humanhood to be a sufficient condition for personhood because humans in general have the capacity of being rational moral agents. Those who accept this interpretation of Kant argue that the list of criteria definition, that's the latter group that I mentioned, of personhood is flawed, as it confuses the idea of one's ability to be a moral agent with the belief that certain humans, such as young children and some sick and disabled humans, can still be the bearers of rights without at the same time being the bearer of duties. Moreover, she points out that the list of criteria definition of personhood has the added problem that we do not know how to accurately measure attributes such as consciousness, self-motivated activity, and self-awareness. So she sees problems. She gives an example. How would one know if the fetus or older embryo is conscious or can feel pain? She cites some evidence for spontaneous fetal activity, excuse me, fetal activity as early as the 5th or 6th week of gestation. Dr. Boss suggests that modern libertarian democracy evolved as a reaction to elitist social structures which claimed that certain humans, because of intelligence, wealth, or social position, religion or nationality, race or degree of cultural development were morally superior to others. This liberalism affirms instead the equal rights of all human beings as the fundamental moral principle upon which to found a political society, basically a democratic society.
Mm-hmm.
Since not all humans are equal physically or intellectually, the equal worth of every human being in a democracy is not a description or a list of characteristics, but is a moral idea, a prescription of how we ought to treat humans. She further states the restrictions of the concept of humanity in any sphere never enhances respect for human life. It did not enhance the rights of slaves, women, children, Jews, blacks, heretics, you and me, workers, capitalists, Slavs, or gypsies. And I expect she could extend her list even further. The restriction of the concept of personhood in regard to the fetus will not do so either. So she classes the fetus along with these other discriminated against groups and feels this is wrong. She goes on to cite statistics which, by implication, link the legalization of abortion back in 1973 with the rise of child abuse. And a quote here, "In a society where the small size and dependency of the unborn human are so frequently used as reasons to deny them equal moral worth, it is not difficult to notice that young children after birth are also much smaller and more dependent than their adult caretakers, thus weakening the normal instinctual restraint and social taboo against the use of violence against those dependents on our care." Well, I think she makes quite a leap in her view there. She cites the pro-choice slogan, "Every child a wanted child," to observe that the claim that we are benefiting unwanted children by causing their death is paternalism at its worst. I don't know if you've heard that argument before. In no other case do we kill potential victims of a crime for their own sake. Applying the adjective wanted or unwanted to any group of humans, be it blacks, women, Jews, or children, carries with it the implicit assumption that the moral worth of these groups of humans is not intrinsic, but depends on their being wanted by those who have power over them. You've probably heard the statement of those who are pro-choice, that people should have wanted children. And
Exactly.
if children are not wanted, they're likely to have quite a few problems in their lifetime. Dr. Boss cites more statistics which would show that men are more in favor of abortion than women, and that those at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder are 2.5 times more opposed to legalized abortion than their more affluent counterparts. I think she's sort of driving at the idea that the idea of having free choice regarding abortion is a middle class and upper class phenomena. And I don't know how accurate that is.
Right. Where did she get her numbers from? Are you familiar
Well,
with
she has footnotes on all this. I could check it out, but presumably they're from studies that were done. And I wondered about those studies because, you know, if you see some kind of legislation that has occurred and then subsequently you see certain things happening, you don't know if they're necessarily directly linked. There could be other causes for the effect that one is noting. She also noted African Americans and other minority group members are more often opposed to abortion than are white Euro-Americans. And this may well be true, I'm not certain, because I have heard some Afro-Americans talking about birth control and abortion as being racist measures against Afro-American or other minority groups.
As a genocide sort of an idea.
Yeah, and personally I haven't been able to accept that or even to follow the logic of it. I would be willing to hear someone explain it, but anyway, Dr. Boss makes the point that we need to deal with the social and legal pressures that drive women to seek abortions, pointing out that the practice of abortion was opposed by the majority of early feminist spokeswomen, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who argued that abortion was more the result of degradation of women than of expanded opportunities for women. Well, maybe that's so, and maybe it's not. Okay, that's essentially what she has had to say. She said it in more detail, but basically that's her approach.
And Dr. Gilbert Frommer, I believe, had another article published?
Yes, his is Abortion, a Philosophical Defense. Gilbert Frommer argues that abortion is morally permissible. He outlines two philosophical, ethical theories to show that abortion is permissible under each of them. These theories are the utilitarianism of John Stuart Mill, principally, and rights-based ethics exemplified by Immanuel Kant. And you'll recall earlier that Dr. Boss had referred to Kant and the view of some people, like, I presume, our Dr. Fulmer, citing Kant. And he does in his article. I think she probably summarized his pretty well in what she had to say as the view that she disagreed with. Anyway, utilitarianism deals with consequences. A good action is one with good consequences. A bad one has bad consequences. The only intrinsic good is pleasure, and the only intrinsic evil is pain, where both are very broadly defined. Physical, psychological, and any other possible pleasures and pains are included. The basic moral principle, then, is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Everyone's pleasure and everyone's pain is to be included as far into the future as we can predict the consequences of our actions. And that's a fairly simple kind of thing, but when you get to applying it, it may become more complicated. The psychological pain of an unwanted pregnancy, Dr. Fulmer believes, is perhaps a greater form of suffering than possible physical pain in most cases. He had mentioned that carrying a child to term under certain circumstances can be very physically painful, but he thinks the psychological pain might be more of a hazard. The woman may lose opportunities in education, employment, or marriage. Additionally, an unwanted child is not as apt to be treated as well as a wanted one. With more than 1.5 million legal abortions performed annually, the burden, economic and social, of denying abortions to women who desire them would be staggering. You can see where he is using some of the arguments that he favors that Dr. Boss had mentioned earlier. So I think they probably understand each other pretty well. However, arguments pro and con abortion are not usually made on the basis of utilitarianism. Instead, a rights-based ethics is commonly employed, in which the central claim is that the fetus has a right to life, which is violated by performing an abortion. The appeal is not to consequences, but to the intrinsic rightness or wrongness of acts. If the fetus is indeed a morally significant entity with a right to life, then there is at least an initial argument that abortion is wrong. The philosophical tradition represented here is the idea most associated with Kant that persons have intrinsic worth, irrespective of status or contributions to society.
Just by genetic makeup,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Or the fact that they're human, you know, they have the right number of chromosomes that will
Right.
develop. Consequences, good or bad, are irrelevant to this theory, at least in its purest form. Thus, to exploit or unfairly harm a person is always in itself wrong. It is the claim that the fetus has such worth that underlies most arguments against abortion. And he has, you know, just in this last section, described Dr. Boss's position. So they are each describing their opponent's position. This is also rather interesting. I'm in a philosophy discussion group, and this next month we're going to be discussing Kant, and we're going to be discussing his ethics. So it fits right in. Maybe I can use this as part of our discussion. But, Dr. Fulmer goes on, is a fetus a person in the sense envisioned by this moral insight that he just described? And I think that's the key question, perhaps. Is it a morally significant entity having moral rights which members of the moral community have an obligation to respect? To answer this question, we must consider just what are the criteria of personhood. And as you may recall, Dr. Boss was talking about personhood. The beginning of her article she indicated that in the past few decades, this is what has been the question of personhood. Obviously, to eat food, thus killing life, and to kill bacteria with antibiotics. Antibiotics, incidentally, means against life. That's a translation of it. These are morally permissible. There are three criteria of personhood that seem prominent in the discussion of abortion: species membership, the potentiality, and the actual possession criteria. And I'll get into each of these as Dr. Fulmer sees them. Most people would believe that membership in the species Homo sapiens determines moral personhood. This is the general idea most people have. On the contrary, Peter Singer has written a book on animal liberation. And in that book, he argues for the principle of equal consideration, not only of humans, but of other animals as well. This does not mean that humans and non-human animals must in all cases be treated alike. It makes no sense to defend the right of a dog to vote or of a man to have an abortion. Under species membership, an irreversibly comatose human being would presumably be considered a person with prima facie right to life. A non-human extraterrestrial alien could never be a person, however wise, ethical, rational, reflective, or civilized he, she, or it may be. But under species membership only, we have moral rights. Can a rationalist accept this conclusion? Certainly Dr. Fulmer does not, and I think he represents probably the rationalist view on this. The second criterion is the potentiality criterion, which says that any living being with the potential to have the moral rights of personhood does in fact have such rights. A fetus has a right to life. Does anyone consider it morally wrong if a woman does not become pregnant during a given ovulatory cycle. If she does not, one or more ova are destroyed. Does anyone think she is morally blameworthy? In other words, in a woman's lifetime, she probably could have 15 or 20 children.
Mm-hmm.
And some do, but
Not including twins.
yeah, some do. But if a woman doesn't have all the children she can have, is this morally reprehensible from the idea of the right to life?
Because she's had the chance
Yeah.
to.
There is a logical error in the potentiality argument as well. To have the potential to acquire a right does not at all entail now possessing that right. Every person is the potential owner of every piece of property, and thus has the potential of having the right of ownership over that property. In other words, I could say, well, potentially I could own New York City. Another thought along that line would be, if a person has a potential right of ownership, does this mean that they can go into a new car place and pick out a car and just drive it off? That's, according to Dr. Fulmer, is a logical flaw in this argument. By the same token, showing that a fetus has the potential to acquire a right to life does not show that it now has such a right. So he makes that observation. Every one of us is a potential corpse. Is it appropriate to treat us as corpses now? Dr. Fulmer does defend the third criterion of personhood, which says that personhood depends on the actual possession of certain characteristics of mind or consciousness, and that these characteristics are precisely those that give meaning to moral concepts and moral experience. Now, I think Dr. Boss probably would have predicted that he would have said that. He differentiates the difference between a normal human being and a rock or plants or insects. Only the human has consciousness or capacity of understanding what does or might happen to them. It is such capabilities that makes morality important. Dr. Fulmer says it is not possible to make a precise list of the characteristics of mind that constitute personhood. But he does list some, and, quote, they are the very things that make morality significant and meaningful. He lists consciousness, rationality, a concept of self, ability to communicate with others, and a concept of morality, even those who disdain and ignore it. This sounds something like the list that Dr. Boss had made earlier. This enables making the distinction between being alive and having a life. I'll repeat that, being alive and having a life. The latter depends on characteristics that are not necessarily biological, but are biographical. Being born at a particular time and place to particular parents. Each person has a body having various characteristics, male or female, strong or weak, healthy or unhealthy, and so on. It is just these biographical traits that give sense to the concept of morality. The relevance of all this to the abortion issue, according to Dr. Fulmer, is that we must make a rational, morally reflective decision about what sorts of living entities are persons, having moral rights which we have an obligation to respect. If we use the criterion of personhood, I am recommending the conclusion is clear, according to Dr. Fulmer. And this is his conclusion. A fetus has none of the above-mentioned characteristics of personhood. A fetus, even at an advanced stage of development, is, in the relevant respects, much more like a plant or an oyster than it is like a developed human person. having the 46 human chromosomes or having the potential to become a full person are morally irrelevant, according to the doctor. To abort a fetus does not destroy a member of the moral community, nor does it violate the rights of any person possessing them. Abortion is not morally wrong. Fetuses have no moral rights because they do not satisfy the criteria of moral personhood. A woman who obtains an abortion is acting within her rights and is morally blameless. That's essentially his view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, I think, the way, I said this before, but the way each of them were able to describe the other's position.
Right, right. It seems that they have read some of their counterparts' material as well, and they understand the positions.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. This has been Freethinking 101, brought to you by the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. And if you'd like to write to the Rationalist Society and share some of your views, our address is P.O. Box 2931, St. Louis, Missouri, 63130, or you can leave a message in the voicemail box, and the phone number is area code 314-298-6649.